All right. So for the final session here, I'm just going to run through a couple of quick um, recaps of what we've covered in this training. Obviously, I've talked about self-care more than once and just how important that is. The bank account metaphor. And then I was really encouraging all of you to focus on these six things that really help keep you healthy, with, sleep and non-sleep deep rest being the most important, sleep specifically, non-sleep deep rest being for restoring dopamine. And then remember, you can use the password Charlie for the peer support tab on our website. And in there I'm going to be including NSDR links, a 10-minute and a 20-minute one. And then there's lots of information in there too. So we'll look at that briefly as well. And I can answer any questions about those resources. Um, Stress symptoms to watch for in your peers. You're obviously watching out for yourself first. Put your oxygen mask on first is the idea, and then what to watch for in your peers. So these are the things that you're likely to notice, and you have that key role of being inside the agency and knowing your peers and knowing what the norm is for them, and then being able to get to know what's happening with them and in their work and personal lives, and kind of having your finger on the pulse of things in a way that nobody else can. So that's really one of the reasons why you're so valuable to a wellness program as a whole. We talked about different coping skills for managing that stress cycle. So when adrenaline and dopamine are up and that cycle needs to be completed, you can do super healthy things like exercise, movement, quality sleep, NSDR, your nutrition, all of these things. Um, Cold water exposure. I'm going to put the protocols for cold water and hot heat exposure on that page as well. That's in the works right now. Um, versus some of those more negative strategies that are, you know, meant to be useful and are maybe something that you or your peers have done to sort of adapt to your stress or your emotions or whatever your circumstances are, but aren't going to be positive for you in the long run. We also talked about safety being at kind of the top when we think about our orientation towards peer support, confidentiality and good boundaries and ethics. Your whole team's success hinges on confidentiality, making sure you are not somebody who gossips. And then neutrality. So non-judgment is part of that orientation and knowing when to consult. So also getting curious, listening to understand, and then knowing when to consult. So you aren't a counselor or a therapist. If you're ever in doubt, consult. That's kind of a good little saying to, if you're thinking to yourself, I wonder if I should consult about this, definitely pick up the phone, reach out to the clinician that you work with. Um, I'm gonna switch over here now to the to-do list, and we can run through that. Let me know if you have questions on this. I will just go through it one by one and throw any questions you have into the chat that might pertain to your particular team. Don't feel like you're wasting everybody's time because I'm sure someone else will benefit from hearing too. So connect with, oh, we're not at the top. Let's start at the top. So it's helpful for your team to have a one or two coordinators. So often this is a sergeant, or it could be a supervisor level person and a line level person, or it may just be one person. But just make sure that whoever it is very passionate about the work, because truly, I have definitely seen the success of these teams kind of hinge on how invested that coordinator is. So, if they themselves are very interested in wellness and motivated to care for peers and, really invest in the role that they've taken on, the teams are super strong and, really helpful when it comes down to it. Um, Development of a wellness survey. So this is how you can identify who your members are. Hopefully that's how you ended up at the training was everyone was asked, who do you already trust? And then the names that show up multiple times are good ones to approach and ask, hey, are you interested in being on peer support? Here's what it entails. Some agencies then even have kind of a process. You have to submit a letter of interest, something like that, to show your um, commitment to it, passion for it, things like that. Um, Utilize data from survey for program focus. We talked about that. You can um, find out what your peers would like the peer team to be doing. Like Commander Harris said, they have a separate wellness committee from the peer team because those don't always have to overlap, especially at a large agency. But at a smaller one, it's really common for the peer team to take on things like maybe hosting trainings or being more proactive in those wellness related things. So I think it depends on the size of the agency. There's about 300 at Washington County. So more commonly in 100 or less, we just see the peer support team kind of taking on both roles. You want to advertise the peer support team development that it is being developed or that someone is going through the class and adding to the team. And here is how we did the selection process. That just helps with buy-in for trust in the team. And then you can, obviously everybody needs to get trained up. Um, and at some point here, if you haven't already in the last week, you want to, especially if you're getting your team started, you want to meet with whoever is on the team and talk about, are you going to have policy? What is that going to look like? Confidentiality statements. There's a sample on the website of Washington County's confidentiality statement. Who's going to take notes at meetings? Do you have a clinical consultant? Um, and, do you have a plan to meet quarterly? So I've found that teams that don't meet quarterly sometimes kind of fizzle out and they end up sort of individually doing peer support within an agency, but not in that true kind of team way, which becomes really helpful to have that team cohesion after an incident and also in a preventative way so that everybody's on the same page. So you are completing your peer support team training. And then we talked during the training about meeting with admin. And so when I meet with teams over the years, I will just circle back. Maybe now you have a different admin than when this team started, or things have changed enough that it makes sense to circle back with them and talk about policy, procedures for different things, and all of that. So that's good to do again. Um, Usually the coordinator of the team creates the agenda for those quarterly meetings. And so you want to be thinking ahead if you'd like your clinician to present on any particular topic. There's, half a dozen topics that I have presented on kind of as requested or as I've seen would be helpful for different teams based on what's going on for them. And then sometimes also think about outreach to the cities in your county to potentially have a combined meeting maybe once a year. So after the Burnsville incident, we started having our teams try to meet once a year with neighboring agencies or um, agencies that you might pull from in a pinch if you don't already have a consortium. So also just know it's possible I could be asking someone from your team or you to maybe come help with whatever we have going on at a different agency that we provide the mental health care for. And that would just be because maybe many of their team members were involved or, for whatever reason it could make sense. So you obviously don't have to say yes, but we do ask quite a bit for that kind of overlap. You can make a flyer for your peer support team. There's a example of a poster on the um, peer support tab on our website. That's a St. Louis Park poster that you're welcome to use as something to work off of. You want to let everybody know when the team has launched. And I would say send the email nobody's going to read, but also go in person to meetings, roll calls, in services, and continually stand up and say, hey, we're still here. This is what we do. This is how it works. I would reiterate confidentiality and the limit to it. And then you're not having to do it, every single time you meet with somebody, they've heard you say it, they got the email, it's in policy, but then it's kind of just common knowledge. You need to have a process for reaching out to those who are involved in those distressing calls. So, um, who will be notified? It's important to have the whole team notified when there's an incident. Um, and whoever is going to be reaching out to those people or running the diffusing, that then is seen by the team who are all getting those communications. So I would, keep everyone in the loop that way and make sure that you're taking turns leading those, assisting those, and getting really comfortable with them, with the diffusings and with the outreach. Some teams, this is not like an immediate thing to do, but within the first year or two, we'll develop a process to reach out to everybody quarterly. That's that's one way to do it. Others have decided annually. Somebody from the team will reach out to every peer, um, kind of break up the list, the roster, and take who it makes sense to work with, or to reach out to, and then just make sure that everybody has been, checked in with at least or offered that sort of peer check-in throughout the year. Um, develop a process for running the diffusing. So, um, you need to know from admin, can people be held over? Can people come in early? Like, how is that going to look? Is your agency a size where you might need to have some crossover with neighboring agencies, offer to do some for them? Um, and you can, of course, also have crossover with, ambulance services, fire, police. All of this is possible. I do know some small agencies who have all of that crossover, chaplains, of course, too, so that those get held regularly. It's an option to consider a wellness app. Um, you can use an app if you aren't already at your agency. I will say I have not seen any of them be well utilized over the years. I've definitely been noticing and paying attention. I worked with Lexapol's app, Cortico, for a while, and then switched, and I now work with MagnusWorks, which is another option. Theirs is the most engaging, I would say. Um, Cortico and MagnusWorks do have cost to them, as does Peer Connect. Um, and then Lighthouse is free. So if you want to look at an app, those are kind of the four main ones I know of. If anybody else knows of others, you can throw those in the chat. Um, Washington County, I believe, uses Lighthouse, but I think it like wasn't working last time we talked about it. I've just honestly seen quite a bit of troubles with those, and not great utilization. So um, I think those are still kind of a work in progress. And ultimately, I got to tell you, nothing is going to come above that one-on-one peer connection and the diffusings and those group interventions. So I think that's your main focus, but certainly worth considering the app since they are a resource that's out there and some people do use them. So the more that you can have at somebody's fingertips, either a phone call to peer support or jumping on an app to get some information or resources, however you want to do that. We do have some teams who've created a website um, for their peer support team. And then on there, they'll link to different resources from our site and they have, everybody's name and contact information who's on the team. They keep that updated. And then I think I mentioned Washington County has little business cards, and on those are a QR code which links you to that webpage with all the information. You always want to be evaluating programs. So if you're just getting started, I would say think about the 6-month mark. Somebody needs to note that around that time you want to send out a survey to get some feedback on the launch of the team and if there's any concerns or additional needs. And that is a very brief 3 to 5 question survey, anonymous, just to make sure you're on the right track, right? And so you won't get 100% response rate from everybody, but what you do get tends to be helpful. And then from there on out, you want to do an annual survey. So same thing, could be similar questions. The questions could be tailored to whatever is specific about your team or your agency. Um, you want to make sure to keep your team at about 10% of your total number of staff served. So if there's 100 first responders at your agency, you want at least 10 on the team, and you want them to span different ages, different shifts, um, male, female, like, right? Everybody, it should be represented on that team. Um, even, we talked about making sure to include records and having enough from each of those areas to really support dispatch and everybody. So keep that in mind that it's usually an ongoing process because people leave or you get authorized to hire more and now you need more on the team, things like that. So people's shifts change. We have one agency where everyone is on one side of the night shift. So, it's really been in their mind to try to get some folks from the B side and some from day shift. So, um, connect with similar departments who have peer support resources to share. Um, there is, you know, many of the metro agencies have teams now. There's one consortium with St. Louis Park and others, and then um, for example, Anoka County has their countywide team. Washington County, we've brought in all of the cities in the county to meet once a year to share resources and then if something big happens, you're not meeting each other for the first time. In a crisis, you're already familiar faces and it's much easier um to have cohesion that way. You want to think about building a resource list. So this is something you can give or refer to based on what's going on with your peers. So if they need resources for how does a person go about getting a chemical health assessment? Who do you talk to in HR if you want to take family medical leave? You can just think of all these different areas. There are inpatient, residential, first responder specific programs. There's Chateau in Utah. There's first responder wellness in California. So you can just really start to compile these things. And we have our own kind of resource or referral list. We refer to people like Mel who have ART training and have done training with me and who we know are doing a really good job. Um, and so you can have your own list like that based on what you do to kind of vet your providers that you put on that list, and have that include your EAP at your agency. Reach out to them. Say, let's say I have a peer who needs an appointment within a week. What does that look like? What is that process like? Because you want to know those details or go through it yourself for real, and then you can speak to it. Um, and then also on our website is a description of diffusings for supervisors. So this is something that Crow Wing County Sheriff's Office created, and they did a really nice job just describing what is a diffusing and what to expect, how and when to utilize a diffusing so that you can go to supervisor meetings and get everybody on the same page about what the heck are these things that peer support is going to come do and talk through how that works. We've also trained some supervisor teams in diffusings so that in a pinch they can run one. And that makes sense for some agencies and some supervisors to just run those themselves. It isn't ideal. Ideally, peer support would be doing it, but that's not always possible if it's, 5:30 in the morning and nobody could make it in or whatnot. Um, You can be an advocate for your peers related to wellness and the resilience factors. So, workout on duty, all of these good things. If you don't already have them, or if they're not realistic to actually be using, you can certainly try to encourage the agency to be really proactive about that stuff and prioritize wellness. Certainly seems to be something we hear is part of retention and recruitment these days, is how robust is a wellness program. And then, what more can be done? What can be added? There's certainly agencies getting creative with these things. Rosemount PD just built a new police department and they have a nap room in there with the ability to do NSDR and, you know, take a 10, 20-minute nap on a lunch break, things like that. So, um, I think they also are stocked with waters and snacks for those diffusings that they run post incidents. Another thing just to think about and talk about as you get started or as you're developing the team is how have past incidences been handled and what lessons are there to be learned? So, what went well? What could the peer team have done to make things go more smoothly? Um, and, what can you then implement so that nobody feels like they weren't supported? So remember, that's the huge part of the equation of PTSD that you are plugging in is that support, both proactively and reactively, so that nobody feels like someone who should have been there for them wasn't, and they were like alone on something that they went through. Think about talking with HR, knowing what processes are like there. You want to, of course, have be friends with the union and have their support. I haven't seen any agencies where there isn't a good relationship there. Do be familiar with your EAP programs. Those are different than us clinicians who are doing first responder specific care for our agencies. And then, of course, work with chaplains as you've seen some of them come through the training. Chaplains can attend the training that you all have just gone to, and then they can attend those quarterly meetings. And then, depending on everyone's comfort level, they can potentially run diffusings. Um, and then it can be discussed, how does that look if a chaplain is present after an incident, maybe helping with a death notification, and then is also providing support to um, the first responders who were involved. I've certainly seen chaplains who have kind of covered all those bases and maybe felt a little like, gosh, did I do that right? Because it's a lot to do, but also a really neat resource to have. And then just provide information on wellness and resilience so you can um, continue to study the areas of resilience that you're really interested in. Um, if you like, mindset and attitude and you're interested in Ryan Holiday stoicism type stuff, you can read those books, podcasts. You can, I even know of a peer support member who went and got trained and kind of a formal coaching certificate. So there's a lot that you can do. And on the tab as well is kind of a train the trainer um, piece that goes in more deeply into the different areas so that you could present on those if you'd like. And then I mentioned earlier to make sure to evaluate the team annually at a minimum and just keep it super simple. People are more likely to answer 3 to 5 questions than a long thing that they have to scroll through that they'll lose interest in and get called away before they finish it. And then you won't get nearly as much participation. So keeping it very short and sweet is usually helpful. And that might look something like, have you utilized the peer support team in any way in the last year or whatever your time frame is? And then if so, how did that go? And if not, is there any particular reason why not? And then maybe something like one thing that could make the team better and fill in the blank kind of thing. You could have also a multiple choice question of, my trust in the team is, 0 is no trust, 10 is all the trust in the world. You can rate kind of anything that you want. Or if there's worries about confidentiality or things like that as you're getting started and you're needing to explain that and build trust, you can be kind of measuring how that trust is being built over time. So that'll determine the success of the team. As I said, you can only help somebody to the extent that they will be honest with you. And so, their willingness to chat with you and open up and reach out is going to be really important and accept your outreach. Any questions at this point? I'm going to switch over then to another slide deck. Just a second here. All right. So we need to view this and I can't see it. All right. There we go. Um, all right. So I'm gonna breeze through some of this. I don't want to repeat some of what Brent talked about last week when he was in, but I just want to kind of pull everything together here and show how when you have a team that is has been created and then is developed and kind of refined as we'd been doing in the years prior with Burnsville, um, just how incredibly well utilized and helpful they can be. So every person who was involved in 218 did return to work. And that is absolutely an effort between the peer support team, our practice, the city and the administration being extremely supportive, and then every single individual doing what it takes to take care of himself, right? So hugely a team effort there that is um, very highly assisted by the peer support team. You really are the bridge inside an agency that um, not only bridges people to the professional care that they need for trauma treatment, but also when we are providing trauma treatment and we're recommending that they start exposing themselves to stressors and beginning to kind of reintegrate back into the work, the peer team is incredibly important in, as you heard from Brent, kind of leading that cause and helping those people with that. So that helps us do our job, and that's a piece of it that we couldn't do, and that's a perfect way for peer support to be helping as well. So agency wellness as a whole includes, of course, this well-built peer team, which you're learning all about. And then you want the team to be an existing and familiar resource that's already trusted. So very much autonomous and running just with the direction of a licensed professional, but still in collaboration with administrators because there will definitely need to be communication there. So if you think about an incident occurring, um, you, we've talked about this. You want to think about the response occurring in phases. So we break down post-incident response to kind of these three buckets of the minutes and hours. And so knowing that, when you speak with admin as a team, knowing that within minutes, the peer team, the contracted clinician, will be notified and all staff, and also at some point in their spouses, and how to do all those things in the most appropriate and efficient way. So that all starts with your preparation ahead of time, right? So however well you're going to respond is based on how prepared you are for all of these pieces that you can predict are going to become the most important thing in that moment. And then how well you'll do it in that moment is based on how well you prepared for that moment. So, um, the days and weeks can include those group interventions. If there's any chance that somebody who was involved could be charged, you want to make sure that you are not running diffusings or debriefs and that a licensed clinician is running group therapy. So that is the only way to protect everybody involved and still provide the group intervention, which is definitely a very efficient way to um, to get a lot of people in the same room getting the education that they need and the support that they need. So that's within days and weeks. You want to hold off on those critiques, those tactical debriefs for quite some time until the acute stress symptoms have subsided. Of course, they're important to do, and we talked about an exception to that with maybe the CNT callouts. Um, but you are within that first 24 hours reaching out as a peer team in person or by phone, not documented with writing, not just a text, maybe a text to set up a phone call or a meeting, but you're not just providing support by text. And in fact, you don't want a paper trail of those details. So that's, initially after an incident, if you're not running diffusing or if a clinician is running some group intervention, peer support is still doing that one-on-one outreach. So even if you can't talk about the details of the incident, you're still asking about how they're doing and how they're feeling and their self-care and their stress symptoms and their support and all of that. And if they have other kind of co-occurring things happening in their life um, at a similar time. Also, think about how peer support needs to be supported. It's way easier said than done. Just like us clinicians, nice and easy to say, yeah, you need to have your own support. But just like us as a peer team, you will probably just want to support your peers before you take care of yourself. And that's normal too. So, um, but keeping it on the list of here's what we need to keep up with and offering those. And like we did, even if not many people can make it or choose to, just because they're so stretched thin, still offer the support. Admin needs to be supported as well. So this is where sergeants who are on the team can be really helpful for doing that one-on-one outreach to administrators and checking in with them as well. Clinicians as well can provide group interventions for admins. And then you're thinking about return to work timelines, potentially. Often, how it works is we work with a client in their trauma treatment, and then we're recommending that they talk with whoever they trust on peer support to help them with their return to work, make sure they don't feel alone, making sure they can manage those stress exposures and reintegrate on a timeline that works for them. Or do we need to address their symptoms with more treatment? And so that gives us a lot of information about how to direct their care as well. So this is kind of how it looks visually. You think about the incident occurring and then how long does it last? Sometimes the incident will last well beyond minutes. And so there is still right away those who are directly involved who may need to be removed from the scene and support starting to be plugged in while others are still unseen, or if there's multiple locations to the incident or things like that. Just depends on how complicated that all is. But that's where everything communication really starts. And where you're needing to start coordinating these first day, first week, first month type plans. So that sort of unfolds within those first few days and week, and then you're really start to have a sense, partly because of the feedback peer support is giving the clinicians about what makes sense here to do at each step. So there is no like, here's exactly how you do this kind of format. It really is dependent on every single incident because they are all unique and need their own unique treatment. Um, the whole goal, of course, is healthy, whole humans. And so within that could be returning to work. It won't always be for everybody, but sometimes when somebody decides that's now part of their goal, that becomes part of our goal as well, or peer support's goal. But ultimately, it's healthy, whole humans and families. And so you're wanting to make sure to address the needs of spouses. We ran a debrief for spouses. And something to know is it can be really difficult to get contact information for spouses. So, something to think about your peer support team doing is gathering that information, maybe through a summer picnic that's held for families or something like that, where you're getting word out about the team, about clinician resources, and gathering their contact info. All right. So some challenges to consider. It can be really hard to know who was directly involved. And sometimes your communication system is locked down for security reasons. And so this is understandably a common challenge. You need to think about resources and how um, understanding your city or county will be, your administrators, the city administrator, the county commissioners, right? Like anybody who has their hand on the purse strings can, um, you know, determine really how many resources you have access to at a time like that. Overtime can end up costing a lot, treatment costs. And there may also be overlapping incidences or stressors, either for an individual or even for a group. So the same group who just went through something recently might now also be involved in this incident. Those can get tied together, and it's also that kind of compounding factor. So have an eye on that. That can make an incident very unique on its own. And then you may be utilizing neighboring agencies. That's something your clinician can hopefully assist with. Um, and then think about competing needs. So we talked about sometimes needing to break up a larger group intervention into two that can maybe run parallel. That sometimes ruffles some feathers for some, but it ends up being usually the best for those who were kind of the core group that were involved and affected the most. Um, and then who's going to help peer support and what does breaks and support look like for peer support and admin. And then sometimes spouses, as you heard, are feeling left out, are wanting their first responder home, but the first responder really wants to be with their crew. That's common as well. And then you may have differences in how things are run on the wellness front. And as far as care plans go, we had care plans for every individual and then for the agency as a whole. And then on the fire side, that person had a very different plan and it was not lining up with what we were doing, and was actually really kind of um, inconvenient for what all we had going on. But we ended up needing to do it the way we did because we had so many people involved and so much to coordinate. Um, and so, sometimes things aren't going to line up just right like that. And so to be aware of that is a possible challenge. So, any questions? Any questions on the to-do list, on your readiness for responding to an incident, on anything else? You're so quiet. All right, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and give you one last chance here. I've got um, one scenario for you all to talk through. Let's see here. And then I probably kind of flew through this because we are done pretty early then. So let's oh, maybe there's a question. Hmm. Oh, I will have a student version of the slides on the website. I can upload those when I do some updates in the next week or two. Somebody just asked about that. Um, yeah, you're welcome. So here's the scenario. So you all are a peer support team at a large agency, let's say, and you hear a DOA call on the radio, and it ends up being the child of a deputy who is currently working right now. What do you do right away? And feel free to come off of mute or use the chat box. I've got it open here and I'll be able to see what you write and I will say it out loud. Otherwise, feel free to jump on and speak into your microphone.
Well, right away, we're going to need support for the deputy, and then I'm thinking their spouse or partner, and potentially their immediate family.
Yeah, so maybe a peer team member for the deputy, not sure where they are at the moment, but on duty and ready to meet them wherever they're probably headed to where their kid or family is. And then another one for the spouse. And then who was directly involved, who's on scene, and who took the call. So some information gathering, some initial assignment of a couple people. What else? You can look at Callie in the background while you think. Short term would get with those folks. Yep. So trying to go wherever they are or offer a ride potentially. One thing I'll note is um, it may sound obvious, but just to be sure, you don't want peer support to be the one that is doing a death notification. What else? The short term, the long term, any of it. So right away, you've got somebody there heading to the scene, there for the spouse or the family. Yeah, so at some point, a diffusing for those directly involved, and then getting personal and present first. Yep. What else? More long term might be connecting a peer with a person as their primary connection. Yeah, it was really helpful in the real life situation here to have one peer member be the connection to the family so that they aren't inundated with lots of asks of how can we help, because they have a lot coming at them anyway. And then long term, keep up with check-ins. This will have a long-term effect on everybody. Absolutely thinking about anniversary dates and holidays and all of those things, birthdays that will come and go without that kiddo. What else? What else can a peer team do? Anniversaries, the deputy's return, absolutely. Partner's response to how the surrounding groups handle everything. Yeah, good considerations. Certainly asking if they would like chaplain support or what's most supportive to them at that time. And what else can peer support do that is more tangible than emotional? Condolence cards, food, meals for the family, support resources, absolutely. Yeah. Putting together cards that get sent, funeral attendance, if, and when appropriate, what does the family want? Can you set up sign-ups for meals to be brought? What ideally do those look like? Any dietary restrictions, right? I mean, you can get super granular if that's helpful to the family, or also you can offer options. Here are some things that we can do. We can do one or all of these things. And because a lot of times people are just, getting through that minute and can't think ahead, childcare is another thing that can be offered, or help coordinating. Anything else you all can think of? You have lots of good ideas here. Oftentimes, a major loss in a family can affect family members differently, and they can need different care at different times or have different process to their grieving. So generally, it's really common to um, connect a couple to couples therapy at some point because sometimes loss of a child can actually lead to the marriage ending because of the couple handling it very differently. So, something to keep in mind and to be asking about as peer support.
That's more common than not, isn't it, Marie? With the divorce rates, with if you lose a child.
Yeah. Yeah. And my understanding is it has a lot to do with just grieving very differently and on different timelines. Yeah. Anything else on this one? These are all really good ideas. You guys came up with them quickly. Monetary support? Absolutely. Raising money for funeral costs, passing a card around for money. Hmm. Yeah. Siblings, how can siblings be supported? Grief specific resources come to mind. Yeah, good. All right. Well, any last questions or thoughts? All right. Well, I won't keep you. I want to say thank you again for your commitment to peer support if you choose to take this on. And for however long that you do, make sure you make it sustainable and your peers and you'll get the most out of it when you take really good care of yourself. Don't be a hypocrite. And then if you haven't seen a licensed professional, make sure you do so ideally in the coming weeks or months so that you have that experience and you can then much more credibly speak to it because you'll absolutely run into peers who do need that. And it'll be really important that you have utilized that yourself. Um, I think that's everything. You're going to get a copy of this recording since I'll just send it to the whole group. Like I said, within a week or two, I'm going to have updates to that peer support page. Um, I think I ended up talking about a lot of the pieces on there, so I didn't pull it up, but you'll be able to find what you need on there. You got your certificates at the meeting, so I think we're good there. I see lots of thank yous in here, but thank you actually for your time and your interest in peer support. Um, and I'm so excited that you all are out there now doing the great work that peer support does. And then reach out anytime if you need something. I'll also email out Mel's information. She is accepting new clients at my practice. We are only working with the agencies that we're contracted with right now because we're so full, but you'd be welcome to reach out to Mel if you need a resource like that. So thank you for being here and take good care. Enjoy this strangely warm October weather and reach out anytime.
Thank you.
Mhm.